So, welcome back. This will be another opportunity for us to chat for a few minutes about emergency management, based around what we're talking about in class for our introduction to emergency management at Ohio Christian University. So this week, short week, but we are talking about disaster myths and some of the sort of crazy ideas that are sometimes associated with emergencies, crises, and disasters. And so we talked about some in class, and your PowerPoint's posted up on the website. But I wanted to talk and just give you a few of the sort of the major myths, and there are many that could make this list, but I'm going to just discuss 4 or 5 of them here over the next couple minutes, just to sort of point them out and to poke holes in them. I mean, honestly. So, the first thing we talked about in class is that sort of the local community, the people that are sort of directly impacted by the event, are going to be of little or no use, right? The reality is that that piece of the population is in large part the first responders. These events are happening, and sometimes even if we have resources that have deployed to the area in anticipation for the event, they're hunkered down somewhere. They're in in the case of a hurricane, they're in some sort of a safe area. And it could be, if you find yourself, if you've decided not to evacuate, or if you're sticking around, the first responders are going to be your neighbors. They're going to be the people who are, living in your community. Those are going to be the first people that you interact with, and those are going to be, I would hesitate to call. In fact, I refuse to call that chunk of the population helpless, and that they're just sort of there waiting for assistance, because in large part they're going to be the first people who are knocking on your door. They're going to be the first people who are walking over and handing you a bottle of water or a sandwich or something like that. These people, these community members are not victims. They're not helpless, and like I said, in fact, they're likely going to be your at least for the first, and in some cases in the first few days, they're going to be the first responders that you're interacting with. Second is that disasters bring out sort of the worst in people. Again, we talked about this in class a little bit, but the reality is that's not the case. I think that at our core, we are, as human beings, sort of self-interested. But time and time again, what we've seen by looking at these large-scale crises and disasters, people actually become very altruistic after disaster. It's not your automatic sort of, you're thinking that people are going to be that way, but it's true, right? People are, people who have been injured and damaged themselves, they're the ones who are stopping by to help, right? They're your neighbors that we talked about a moment ago about the population being helpless. Those people are going to be the people who are coming to knock at your door and make sure you're okay. We get a lot on TV and in the media that people are just going to be, it's going to become Thunderdome, after the first raindrop hits the ground. But the reality is that it's vastly different than that. We also should recognize, though, that there are going to be sort of outliers, and there are going to be times when people are not altruistic, and there are going to be times when people are competing. Sometimes there are going to be times when they're competing for resources and that sort of stuff. So we do need to keep that in mind. Thirdly, there is the sort of the fear that most deaths occur at a time when rescue is actually available. That's a myth, right? In fact, most disasters survivors, as I've said a couple times now, they're survivors because of their neighbors, right? Because of local people, not from some sort of outside, knight in shining armor on a white horse comes riding in. This isn't necessarily saying that there's not a place for that, but most deaths occur while the disaster is actually happening, right? Not afterwards when rescuers are available. As I said a few minutes ago, your responders, the people who are there to save the lives, they're having to sort of protect themselves at the very beginning and during the event, right? So during the storm and when the hurricane winds are rushing and the water is flowing, they're having to protect themselves. That's when injuries and deaths and that sort of thing are going to happen during the storm. And the reality is that no one is able to really, apart from people who are huddled together, to help each other, because we're all just trying to stay alive. As quick as responders are able to, they're going to start pulling people out of homes. They're going to start pulling people off of roofs, and they're going to start saving lives. But the reality is, while the storm is at its worst, it's not an opportunity to get in there and actually get to work. Let's see. What about disasters cause epidemics, right? We are, honestly, in large part, we're convinced that, if there's a big storm or something like that, it's going to, it's going to bring up all kinds of diseases and that sort of stuff. But the reality is, disasters like we might experience here in the United States, and natural disasters, those rarely cause outbreaks, epidemics, large-scale sickness, because those epidemics and stuff, they pop up a lot of times in emergencies, but really a lot in what we would call like sort of conflict type disasters, right? And war zones, and in areas, large refugee populations and that sort of stuff. This is in large part due to the fact that, the healthcare and, access to medicines, clean water, that sort of stuff is harder to come by. While within the U.S., after a big storm, we might put out boil alerts or drink water. Those resources are accessible, where they may not be in other parts of the world. And then finally, and we did touch on this a little bit in class, but a major myth, and I think this has in large part to do with why we end up running low on resources sometimes, is that after sort of the event takes place, that very quickly that communities can get back to normal. This is not the case. I was privileged to be working with the Salvation Army when we closed out our final account for Katrina 10 years later. So from the day that hit until 10 years, we were still providing services, right? So for Katrina, we had, about a week or something. We watched it sort of forming and moving. And then it hit, and the actual impact and the first handful of days, those were very high action, intense times. And then what happened is it slowly began to sort of fade out, right? And then when it gets to a certain point, people stop being interested in it, especially people who aren't directly affected. People stop being interested in it. People stop deciding to part with their money to help out with the actions that are going on the ground. And then before long, it's sort of forgotten about. Unfortunately, for the people who are directly affected, they've not forgotten about it. And the effects of that storm for Katrina took 10 years worth of activities and recovery projects and stuff for us to reach a point where we thought we were good to shut down operations. So there is things don't get back to normal very fast. So we covered, that's 4 or 5 additional pieces and what we talked about in class. But, there are some sort of myths that help perpetuate some of these issues that we run into within the field. And, our job as emergency managers in some cases might just be sort of trying to unmuddy the waters and give everybody sort of a clear vision of what this process is going to look like, the emergency management process, and specifically what's the process going to look like after someone has been sort of directly impacted with an event. So, thank you.